So Brandon, let's just suppose that if in fact Jesus did manage to get out alive, which we have just heard is impossible. Aside from the fact that it completely destroys everything that we believe as Christians. Okay, let's throw that out the window. What else would we need to consider in this scenario?
Yeah. First I just want to concur. It's not possible. And the reason this is so important for me is because, I'm on a college campus every day where there's supposed to be an open exchange of thoughts and ideas. But on a college campus, there also needs to be some degree of academic integrity. And those ideas need to be backed by evidence and support. And what you're hearing is that there's unanimous agreement in the medical community that it is not possible that Jesus survived this event. So when we think about the idea that Jesus was somehow put in a tomb and over a period of 3 days in the cool, damp air, he was resuscitated. It's not going to happen. The idea that Jesus took a stroll to India, it's just not intellectually feasible. The idea that Jesus was somehow involved in this activity of mistaken identity, it holds no water. I think we've got a picture that we're going to try to put up here on the screen. It's a picture of Jesus and Simon. And so I just want you to look at that picture, and I want you to entertain the idea that you could accidentally crucify the wrong person. One of those individuals has been scourged, one has not. One has been brutally beaten and is bloody, one is not. One has a crown of thorns on his head, one does not. There is no reasonable, intellectual individual on the planet that should conclude they accidentally crucified Simon from Cyrene instead of Jesus. Not to mention the fact that we also have all of the eyewitnesses who would have been there, Jewish leaders who would have said, whoa, you're getting ready to crucify the wrong guy. And if I'm Simon from Cyrene, I think I would be saying, hey, you're getting ready to crucify the wrong guy. And so when we just really think this through in an intellectual fashion, there's no reason in the world to believe this. And then on top of that, I think we could also go back to the fact that there's a German theologian named David Strauss who in 1835 put forth an argument that no one since his day has ever refuted. And his argument was this. He said, imagine with me that Jesus really did come off the cross and he was still alive. And he's resuscitated in the tomb and he comes out and he takes a stroll and he meets up with his disciples. And he begins to have a conversation with the disciples, and the disciples look at him in this poor, pathetic, traumatic condition. He's got scars from the crown of thorns that were on his head. He's got 8-inch spikes that were driven into his hands and left significant wounds. The Old Testament tells us that his arms were pulled to the point that he probably had a dislocated shoulder on each side, would not have been able to use his arms. With spikes driven into his feet, he would not have been able to walk. He has a spear wound in his chest. And somehow we're supposed to believe that the disciples saw this Jesus and decided to go out and start a worldwide movement that announced and declared that someday we too could have resurrected bodies just like his. There is no academic integrity in that thought process whatsoever. And so if people in the academic community are going to dismiss the historical event of the crucifixion of Jesus, they're going to have to come up with a better argument or concoct some better theories than that.
Very true. Well, guys, I want to thank you so much for your time. Let's give them one more round of applause. But before we go, Brandon, I've got one last question for you. We've spent 3 weeks attempting to decipher, to analyze, to understand what Christ went through in the last hours of his life. Is it possible, and I know I'm asking a former preacher this, just in the short time that we've got left, leave us with just a summation, a summary of what we've discussed. I mean, is that possible? Can you do that?
Yeah, I'm going to try.
Okay.
I think that when you try to sum up, all of this information, both in Sunday morning and the sermons Tommy's been preaching and panel discussions and movie clips, and you try to bring it to a focal point. I think it's got to be simple and it's got to be direct. And so to make it as simple as possible, I'm going to hopefully sum it all together by reading from my 4-year-old son's rhyme Bible. And it's called The Day Jesus Died. It says, one day Jesus came to town, and people threw their garments down. They all began to shout and cheer, Hosanna, Hosanna, Jesus is here. But when the leaders in that town heard the cheers, it made them frown. They didn't like to see this man, and so they made a wicked plan. They came to get him late at night with all their torches burning bright. The leaders took him to a place where soldiers laughed and hid his face. And when the sun had risen high, they put him on a cross to die. They didn't know he was God's son and that he died for everyone. Jesus' friends all wondered why the Son of God would have to die. They came and took his body down and sadly laid it in the ground. They sealed the tomb and walked away. There's never been a sadder day. And if the story ends right there, that is true. There has never been a sadder day in the history of the world. But we know that there is a Matthew 28, and we know that there is a John 20, and we know that there are other portions to the story that have yet to be told. And that's why we want all of you to come back next Sunday to celebrate Easter and to discover that there really is the rest of the story that has yet to be told by this panel.